I can see touch, stand up, take, more, edit, create.
Go with touch.
If you left click on the purple covering of the chair, that should give you the touch menu.
Yeah. All the different positions you can sit in.
Right.
I mean, you may be quite happy with the one you've got at the moment, because...
Let me just see what it looks like. Ah.
If you see anything called cuddles, avoid it.
Yes. Do not click. Do not click.
Chantal says,
There's
laughing out
only one
loud.
called touch, and it doesn't seem to be doing anything. Sorry.
So the touch menu is the one that you'll see if you left click on the chair itself. When that comes up, you should see some settings for singles, couples, and there might be an adjust setting. Click on singles and then take a look at the different positions you can choose.
Don't worry, we've all been through this. So just click on... Ah, good, you're trained.
I think that one will do.
Yes. Right. Okay.
McKeever says, you're trained laughing out loud.
Genevieve, it's lovely to have you back.
It's incredibly flattering to be back. Thank you all.
And today you're actually going to be doing some reading.
Yep.
I believe. So...
Gwen says,
yes.
She has learned so much in a very short period of time, lovely folks.
Very quickly.
I'm not quite sure what I'm doing, but as long as it's not making the thing fall over, I'll be happy.
It's absolutely fine. So, today you're actually going to give some readings, and we're going to follow that up by a Gothic ball at the back of the library, and possibly just outside the library as well. I'm not sure how far our... I think we have a bit of room outside to dance as well.
That's fantastic, thank you.
So, what are you planning to read today?
Well, I happen to have my proof copy of Damned with me, the third book in the Scarlet Revolution trilogy, and I was going to read at least part of a chapter from partway through, when Eleanor, the protagonist, and Lady Marguerite Blakeney are on the coach to Oxford, disguised. If that would suit people?
Yes!
Excellent.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Are you... sorry, I should have asked beforehand. Are you okay with this being live streamed?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Fine.
Okay, just tell me when to start.
Whenever you want.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much for inviting me here. I hope this will entertain you. This is from Book 3 of the Scarlet Revolution trilogy, Damned. Those of you who've read Book 2 will remember that it finished with news that Lady Marguerite Blakeney had been arrested for treason and spying. Shocking, I know. So, this is Chapter 3, at which point Lady Marguerite has been broken out of house arrest, and she and Eleanor are going to Oxford for reasons that make sense in plot context. In disguise, of course, and they're about to catch the early morning stagecoach. In disguise. I apologise in advance, I'm not very good at doing accents, so if I lose track of them, sorry guys. Okay. The night's rain had washed the sky clear, The dawn was unsullied by clouds, and the light seemed to fill every nook of the coachyard, etching the high roofs black against the pale sky. Outside the inn's coachyard, Fleet Street was already bubbling with activity, full of the life and spirit of London at its best. Occasional shouts and screams suggested it was also full of the life and spirit of London at its worst. The coachyard of the Bolton Tun similarly buzzed with activity. As in the beehives Eleanor had seen when she was younger, everyone somehow dodged around everyone else with perfect smoothness and timing, as though it were a quadrille they'd rehearsed beforehand. Porters swung their piled barrows around travellers with barely a word of rebuke. Well, perhaps a few words. Grooms led horses to and fro between coaches, and customers in search of a morning drink cut through the whole melee with sublime disregard for anyone else's safety. As this inn was the main starting point for coaches from London to Oxford and beyond, it was particularly crowded and busy, so hopefully nobody would remember one more middle-aged woman and her humble maid if the Bow Street runners came asking questions. Eleanor felt as though the inside of her head had been scoured out and left to dry. She hadn't had any sleep. None of them had. All their time had been taken up with preparing for the journey and changes to their appearances. Eleanor looked like her normal self again, with her pale hair pinned up neatly and a decent dress and shawl. It said something about the last few months that she had needed to glance twice at her reflection in a pane of glass, because she seemed to be looking at a stranger. Charles had been on the earlier coach, which left half an hour ago, at 6 o'clock, and with any luck he'd be able to close his eyes for an hour or two on the journey. Common sense might have said it was a good thing they weren't travelling on the same coach, since their false identities weren't supposed to know each other, but Eleanor couldn't help wishing in her heart of hearts that they had been. She could have sat next to him, squeezed in as they would be leaning, on her head on his shoulder. "I demand to speak with your superior!" Lady Marguerite's voice shrilled through the air, twitching Eleanor to straight-backed attention, as though the woman was next to her rather than inside the booking office. Lady Marguerite's voice was normally so sweet and modulated, drawing attention without being at all demanding or sharp. Eleanor had to remind herself, again, that Milady had been an actress before her marriage to Lord Percy. But that was really the mark of a good actress, or actor, wasn't it? When one forgot they were an actress. One of the porters came to a pause next to Eleanor and put down the handles of the trolley of luggage he had been pushing. "Your mistress, is she?" he asked, with a nod towards the office. "She is," Eleanor agreed. "Mrs. Hardcastle. We had word that her nephew's ill in Oxford, and she wanted to catch the next coach there." "Well, I'm sorry to tell you this, me pretty, but there's no room on the 7 o'clock, and then there won't be any room more till tomorrow morning. Packed full it is, so tight you couldn't slide a card between the customers." "Oh dear," Eleanor frowned. That meant Charles would be alone for a whole day without anyone to watch his back. She will be disappointed. "Don't you worry about it, sweet. Alan in there will butter her up and get her sorted with a ticket for tomorrow." His expert eye took in the pile of luggage which Eleanor was guarding. 2 portmanteaus, one large and one small, and a couple of hat boxes. "We'll have room for you and your bags then. And since you're such a pretty girl, if your mistress doesn't want you at her side all evening tonight, then perhaps you'll consider stepping around the corner with me for supper." "Annie!" Lady Marguerite came sweeping out of the office, the heavy silk of her old-fashioned dress rustling with every step. She was unrecognisable, powdered and painted like a woman twice her age, with a heavy grey wig concealing her natural hair, and her steps brisk and aggressive rather than their usual floating elegance. She walked like a woman who did not expect to be stopped, and would make anyone's life extremely unpleasant if they tried. "I have managed, there, finally, to obtain a seat. Where is my fan? And my parasol? Fetch me some tea at once. We have half an hour to wait. This shoddy service is insupportable. I shall complain at the very highest level, and find someone to take care of our luggage." When you say a seat..." "Silly girl!" Lady Marguerite rapped Eleanor on the knuckles with the fan. "Inside the carriage for me, of course. You will be on the roof. Mind your manners and don't talk to any strangers." "Sounds like you work for your wages," the porter muttered sympathetically as Eleanor trotted off to find some tea. "Oh, you have no idea," she murmured in response. Eleanor was sharing the roof of the carriage with 2 other maidservants, a couple of staggeringly hungover students content to lean on each other and doze, and an elderly gentleman wrapped in a coat far heavier than suited the weather. He constantly sucked pastilles and sniffled, reading and rereading a copy of the Times as though he intended to memorize the paper. By common consent, the 3 young women had crowded together on the rear seat, even though it was cramped, and left the front seating to the students and elderly man. They might not know each other, but they all knew the dangers of being a woman travelling among men. Eleanor was wedged in on the far right. The woman in the middle was a few years older than Eleanor, and was in a very cheap dark blue muslin dress that didn't suit her. She seemed amiable enough. On the far left was a perky young miss in a much nicer dress and shawl, with brassy curls that foamed out from under her bonnet. She kept on shooting bitter glances in Eleanor's direction, the reason for which Eleanor could only puzzle over. "Well now," the woman in the middle said, ignoring the ebb and flow of London traffic below them. They were at least 8 feet up, and Eleanor was trying not to think too hard about it. "I don't know how far you ladies are travelling. I'm only going as far as Reading, which is where the Reverend Watson gets off. He's in the carriage below us, you know, escorting me to take up my new position as under matron to St. Thomas's Home for Orphans. Extremely proud of it, can't say otherwise. Looking forward to taking care of all those dear little moppets, whose parents are no longer with us, gone to a better place. Name's Sarah Milt, and who would you be?" It took a moment to realise that Sarah Milt had reached the end of her sentence. "I'm Annie Johns," she said, doing her best to project shyness. "Maid to Mrs. Hardcastle. She's in the carriage like your Reverend. Her nephew in Oxford's gone and sprained his ankle or broken something. The letter wasn't very clear, and she feels it's her duty to go and minister to him, and tell him as how he should be more careful in future." "Does your mistress's nephew know she's coming?" the other woman asked, taking an interest. Eleanor rolled her eyes. "Well, she sent a message to say she was coming, but she took her time about how best to word it, and we can only hope they arrive there ahead of us. Not that that bothers her. She's one of those people who thinks everyone should be so pleased to see her that they don't need any warning she's on her way. She had me running around with notes to all the tradesmen to tell them not to make the usual deliveries, and sending letters to her lawyer to keep the will locked up tight, and the family diamonds in the safe, but right in time to make certain to tell her nephew to expect her. No, he's going to be lying in his bed, probably with a pint of porter in his hand, to make him feel better about his poor ankle, and then the door going to come flying open and she'll march in and—" Sarah Milt giggled. The 3rd woman finally broke her sullen silence. "I can't say as I was feeling particularly friendly towards you," she said, "but if you've got to put up with that, then least said soonest mended. My name's Kitty Mattis." "I didn't offend you, did I?" Eleanor asked. "Not you so much, but when your mistress forced them to give her a seat on this carriage, it meant there wasn't room inside for me no more, like my mistress had paid for. So now I'm up here with you, and let's hope it's not going to rain today. Probably will, though." Kitty toyed with a metallic ringlet. Eleanor, experienced by now in the use of dyes to change one's hair colour, couldn't help thinking the wash she'd used was far too harsh. "Miss Bethany, that's my mistress, likes someone to play a hand of cards with her while she's travelling, or to read to her from the Bible." "Miss Bethany doesn't travel by public transport often, does she?" Sarah asked, giving voice to Eleanor's own thoughts. "Not likely. Her brother's got his own coach, and if she needs to go anywhere outside London, he sees to it, and she never has to sport no blunt for it." Eleanor recognised some of the racing cant which members of the League dropped from time to time. "Her brother, he pays for most things for her, but he said he weren't going to drive to Oxford, not even for his dear sweet sister. Didn't want nothing to do with all them books or people reading them. He likes the horses and the fancy. That's the boxing clubs, better." "Someone should tell him you can't catch an education like a disease," Eleanor said, and all 3 of them laughed. "So why is she going to Oxford?" Sarah asked. "Is it for a holiday? The Reverend often says the architecture's a feast for the eyes. Such pretty ways he has of talking. He's even better when he's in the pulpit, but it sounds like there's too many stairs for my liking." "Cousin of hers wanted her to visit," Kitty said. She lowered her voice, and the 3 of them leaned their bonnets together. "Fact of the matter is, I can't say I'm too upset to be getting out of London for the moment." "But why?" Eleanor asked. "I mean, London." She didn't have to elaborate further. All of them understood what she meant. The shops, the markets, the clothes, the entertainment, the company. "Either of you walk out much in the evening lately?" Kitty asked. A shadow came over Sarah's face. Not myself. I haven't got a young man to go out walking with, and I'm not the sort to go out otherwise, though naturally I wouldn't say a word against anyone else. And the evenings are later at the moment in any case. It stays light so much longer after sunset, such beautiful weather. And of course the dear little children take such a deal of caring for, but one hears things. Eleanor shook her head. Madam's been having evenings with her friends to raise money for missionaries, she excused herself, and it's kept all the household busy. What's the talk? Kitty stared at the road behind them as the carriage clattered through the streets of London, not meeting the eyes of the other woman. You know about the blood trade? She asked. Eleanor thought back to what she had seen in Covent Garden a month or so ago, with sellers on every corner touting blood, fresh human blood, supposedly from healthy young men and women. And there'd been the victims' ball she attended as a servant, where she'd been nothing but a source of blood for the vampire guests. Oh, not harmed, because one didn't smash the good chinaware, unless was very drunk or careless. But it hadn't even been a matter of class, with the nobility disregarding servants as they usually did. It had been something else, as though the vampires were the human beings, and everyone else wasn't real in the same way, just a piece of furniture. Even the upper servants had been looking down on the lower ones who provided the blood. Had this all been spreading? It's not from my mistress I heard it, Kitty said, her voice pitched so it would carry over the noise of travel, but still low enough not to reach their fellow passengers on the coach roof. It's from her brother, the one as pays for her, hired me and everything. He was the one who said that a pretty girl like me should be careful about where she steps out these days. There's talk up there in them political circles. Worrying talk. Which Sir Percy wouldn't necessarily have heard, Eleanor thought, as he'd been so busy taking pains to portray himself as a fool and unreliable lackwit, whose only interest is in tying his cravat. Is your mistress's brother highly placed? She asked, after what you mentioned he said about Oxford. He's got friends as in the military, Kitty explained. They talk to him, and he talks to me, and they say as it's women who gossip. Well, it's not gossip if it's important, Sarah said. That's a fact. If I tell you there's a lunatic with an axe running down the street, then that's not gossip, is it? That's a warning. Same as I might give anyone else who needed it, who was in danger. And if we're in danger, then it's not gossip to share what we know. It's the sort of thing that's in the Bible, with all the disciples writing each other letters about how the world was for them, and if there was danger, and if they can do it, I don't see as we can't, because Lord knows there's few enough who'll look out for us. She paused. All those poor orphan children I'm going to. But you said blood trade, Eleanor asked. Well, you know as how normally vampires... For a moment Kitty hesitated, her voice lowering on the word. As how them aren't in Parliament, and can't be ministers or command regiments or all that sort of thing. Both Eleanor and Sarah nodded. Been that way for hundreds of years, Sarah said, and can't say but that it isn't a good thing. Otherwise how would they ever stop doing those jobs? You'd have all the government full of them, with none ever leaving. And I don't have a word to necessarily say against any of them, but I can't help feeling that wouldn't be proper. London was falling behind them now. The air became cleaner, with the smells of the road and countryside wafting over rather than the stink of gutters and the dung and crowded people. The sky was perfectly clear and beautiful, with the sun shining down, as though they were in one of the pictures Eleanor had seen in Blakeney House. All green fields, blue skies, and dancing shepherds and shepherdesses. It felt wrong to be talking of conspiracies and blood on such a day. Well, my mistress's brother told me, or I might have heard him talking to other people about it while I was fetching and carrying, that there was talk about some of that changing, what with the war and the king being sick. She chose the mild term, as if it was just a matter of a common cold, though Eleanor had certainly heard the darker rumours, babbling, foaming at the mouth, outright madness. They're saying, as perhaps some of them, who have hundreds of years of experience in such things, should be stepping forward to serve their country, and the law should be changed so they can. They're even saying maybe more of our young men have served the king as soldiers. Well, maybe if they weren't just human, then we'd win more battles in France. So maybe... Eleanor's hand went to her mouth in shock. They'd never, she said. The worst slang she'd heard from the League was insufficient reaction to this proposal. Surely not. They say we're at war, and we've got to do everything to win it, Kitty answered. Well, then it wouldn't work in any case. Sarah came in as the voice of common sense, and Eleanor felt her stomach settle again as the older woman spoke. Don't they always say, as it's a very difficult thing to turn people into something like themselves? And even if perhaps it's not as hard as they say it is, then what on earth would all them soldiers eat on the ships over to France and when they get there? Or when they're in camps over here in England? It stands to reason you can't have more of them without having more of what they need to drink. Like with foxes and rabbits. My pa was a grainkeeper and knew about that sort of thing. And it just wouldn't work. People would object, she finished comfortably. Eleanor thought about France and people objecting, and how it had ended up with the vampires being dragged to the guillotines, except for the ones who had managed to hide themselves in the shadows of the leading revolutionaries. Yet Kitty had spoken of a blood trade as though it was an established thing. Perhaps people wouldn't object that much if it wasn't them in person opening their veins, she said quietly. People who aren't protected, though. Kitty shivered in spite of the heat, drawing her shawl closer round her shoulders. There's girls I know what may be on the street, but they don't deserve what happens to them, not having someone to look out for them. You know, don't you, Annie? You know how it is. I don't see why Annie has anything to know about it, Sarah protested. With a nice, steady, upright mistress, even if she sounds as she could be a little difficult on bad mornings. Annie knows what I'm talking about, Kitty said, and drew one finger meaningfully in lines along the inside of her forearm. With a jolt, Eleanor realised that Kitty must have seen her faded scars from when she had given blood to Lady Sophie, her mistress, for, well, the whole of her life up till a year ago. She had hoped they weren't too obvious, but the July heat was merciless, bringing every old scar from wounds to smallpox into view. Kitty was clearly aware of what they meant. Likewise, Eleanor could make a few guesses of her own about Kitty. The other woman who had friends who were on the street, she had been employed by her mistress's brother, and she was able to listen to his private conversations. She was clearly the most worldly wise of the three of them. Which really wasn't any of Eleanor's business. After all, how could it compare in terms of scandal to being a member of the League of the Scarlet Pimpernel? Eleanor hesitated, trying to find some way of phrasing things which wouldn't betray too much. The world's a harsh place, she said, and if someone in authority tells you to do something, then how much choice does a woman have if she doesn't want to be turned out without a character and left on the street? Kitty nodded firmly. True enough, she said. A woman does what she has to do. I'm worried, though, Eleanor confessed. Perhaps none of this is going to happen, but the fact you've even heard talk about it how it could happen isn't a cheering thing. There are already enough people in power saying as how anyone who speaks out against the government or says anything they don't like should be arrested. Where did you hear about that? Sarah asked. Kitty didn't look surprised, though. Oh, a friend of Mrs. Hardcastle had been to some sort of social affair with philosophers and charitable types in blue stockings, and people who talk about change and call it enlightenment, Eleanor explained, drastically paraphrasing a party she had attended a few months ago, clinging to Lady Marguerite's hem. She said the Bow Street runners turned up and started arresting people, just walked right in through the front door. This drew a gasp of shock from the other woman, both of whom would know the proper entrance for tradesmen and runners was round the back. And when some of the guests tried to walk out, well, the runners knocked them over the head and took them off to Newgate. There's a lot of people in Newgate these days, Sarah said darkly. And the prison hulks, them ships they've got moored in the Thames, and they say Portsmouth and Plymouth too, on account of how there's not enough room in the jails. And the Reverend says there's more people in Bedlam every day, and places like it, with some still sensible enough, but packed off to by their families, and dosed up with laudanum, because they weren't behaving proper in public, and... She trailed off. It's not right, she finished, but very quietly. Someone'll do something about it, Kitty consoled her. It's not as if this is France. What was that you were saying about France? One of the young men demanded. The women looked at each other. Nothing, sir, Eleanor said virtuously. Just saying it's not as if it was France here. Perhaps it should be. He shook back lank hair and adjusted his neckcloth. For too long this country has avoided the questions which have plagued all countries since time immemorial. Albion must arise, as Blake writes in his glorious poetry. Our isle must shake itself from its slumbers and... Oh, do shut up, Sexton, his companion yawned. It's too early in the morning for this. I will not be silenced! If you haven't got a headache, I have, and I'm sure these women don't want to be bored by your revolutionary thoughts. The second young man attempted a charming smirk, which mostly came across as just a leer. Revolutionary? Pah! Pah! Faire! The old gentleman nearly choked on his pastille, flustered. He waved his copy of the Times at the young men menacingly. The two of you should be joining the army, defending England, not wasting your time on philosophy. He put the sort of venom into the word which Eleanor usually associated with housekeepers discussing dust and tarnish. Spending your father's good money at Oxford like wastrels, rather than devoting yourselves to sensible studies and honest work. If I had my way, boys like you would be whipped. What's England coming to? Mohawks abroad on the streets of London, women kidnapped from their homes, French spies on the loose? We're very sorry, sir, Sexton's friend said, kicking Sexton's ankle meaningfully. My friend was misunderstood, or possibly misunderstanding. Are you on your way to Oxford too? As Sexton muttered clearly insincere apologies, and his friend continued to smooth the waters, Eleanor wished she could get her hand on the old man's copy of the Times. There might be something in it about Lady Marguerite's disappearance. But more than that, she wanted to assess just how much of what her fellow travellers had whispered to her could be true. It was what Sir Percy would have called deuced unlikely, though she had happened to be travelling with anyone carrying particularly important or secret information. So was what Kitty and Sarah had been saying just now common gossip, albeit gossip which painted a particularly unpleasant picture? Had she and the League been blind as to what was going on in England, with their focus always on France? Perhaps it was vanity on Eleanor's part to think of herself as an integral part of the League, but she had eyes. She should have been able to see what was happening around her. Saying that she should know her place, and never think of standing up to injustice was, well, outdated. The Revolution had proven that, whatever else it might have done. Yet Kitty's belief, or at least hope, that someone will do something about it, left open the question of who that someone would be. The king? Known to be ill, possibly mad, and even then subject to Parliament. Parliament itself? Remembering how a hidden group of vampires in France had exerted their influence over the Committee for Public Safety, and beyond that National Convention, Eleanor wondered, her mouth dry with fear, just whose interests Parliament governed in these days. If anyone could do something about this, it might be the League. But where in Oxford should they even start? And that's where I'm pausing for the moment. Thank you all very much for listening.
It's intriguing.
Thank you. Carefully chosen to be intriguing.
And it's out in just a couple of weeks.
22nd of May.
Yeah. Oh. Actually, Dawny has very cunningly put out a copy of it
Gwen
with a
says,
link so that
"Get
you
those
can
pre-orders in over at the
pre-order
book
it.
table."
As Gwen
Chantal
says,
says,
at the book
"Smiley
table, you
face."
can pre-order this one.
Marion says, "Lovely."
So, are you feel in good enough voice to give us another extract from something?
Actually, just,
Or shall we take some questions from the audience, which will give you a bit of a break?
I'm happy to take questions from the audience if they've got any.
Right. So, audience, do you have any questions? Someone is typing.
Safia says, "Audience, do you have any questions?"
I mean, if not, I can always go back and read the prologue from the book, if that would amuse people.
I certainly want to hear the prologue, yes. But I was going to ask,
Marion
did you have
says,
to do a lot
"How do you
of
get started with a
research
novel?
into
Outline. Just go with flow."
Regency England?
Ashley
Well,
says,
it would
"Will
actually
any of
be
the people from the
Georgian
coach
England,
reappear later on?"
because it was just at the beginning of the start of George III's madness, wasn't it?
Yes, it was George in England. I did have to do some research because while I am very fond of Georgette Heyer and I have a whole shelf full of her historicals, as you, well, as you all know, that was about a few decades later. So it would have been inappropriate to borrow from that too closely. And also, while I have read the Pimpernel books themselves and borrowed a fair amount of characters and plot from there,
Mm.
I didn't want to, I wasn't totally sure how reliable the historical data in that was. So yes, I had to look up a certain number of things. I have a few books sitting around the place, some of which I reference in the acknowledgements in Damned.
Mm.
One of the most recently acquired ones was about stagecoaches.
I wondered about that. I wondered about the route of the Oxford stagecoach.
Well, luckily there are a few useful records around the place about the routes of stagecoaches, how they worked. I mean, stagecoach, you could probably cram about 6 people inside, maybe 8 if you cram them very closely, and you could put some more people on the roof along with the luggage. And yes, it was top heavy. On the positive side, if it crashed while you were in the countryside, the people on the roof might have a better chance of safety if they landed on the grass, whereas the people inside might be more likely to actually be injured in the accident
Gosh.
more severely. But yes, it really was a case of packing them in, packing more people on the roof, packing the luggage on the roof.
Hiccuper says, "Oh my."
Stopping, going from inn to inn, changing the horses regularly. The food would be, if you'd booked the meal, the food would be theoretically ready at the inn, but it's probably going to be reheated from previous meal. It would be a case of, well, if you were the sort of person who could afford to get good food, really good food at inns, you wouldn't be travelling by the public stagecoach. And in answer to someone's question there, I'm afraid most of the people from the coach aren't going to appear later on, apart from Lady Marguerite, of course. In answer to the question about how do I get started with a novel, I usually have to have some sort of outline to work with, though it may be various degrees of depth. The thing is, when I'm starting out, I usually have some sort of outline, but it may be very bare, or at least a lot more detailed on the beginning than it is later on in the plot. And if I'm actually sending an outline to my agent to send to the publishers, then that has to be fairly detailed. But if it was for a later book in the series where I'd already got a contract for, if you like, all 3 books, then the outline might be that I started off with might be a bit vaguer and more prone to change due to good ideas I'd had in the meantime, like that Bouchard quote about the author reserved the right to have a better idea, or
Yes.
characters who had appeared in book 1 or 2 and who I thought would make an interesting appearance in book 3.
Marion says,
I think
"Interesting."
most authors have different procedures. Some people plot things out in a great deal of detail. Other people have some structure, but it's more a case of marking points on the map, and getting between those points is something they do as best they can when they get to it.
Huckleberry writes by the seat of his pants ha.
And of course, you're going to be going back to edit the whole thing later anyhow, so it's not as if it's a case of write it down and then throw it out to the agent with never a second glance. There would be lots of second glances.
Indeed.
Marion says, "Ha."
Okay, shall I read the prologue while I'm at it?
Yes, please.
Okay, just making a reach for my iPad and finding it again. This is from the proof copy that I've got on my iPad. I don't have any proper copies yet. I look forward to getting them and gloating over them.
Do you do that when you get them? Do you sort of sit and go, mine,
Sandy says,
mine?
Smiley face.
For a little bit, yes. And then I post pictures online of me
Huckleberry
holding
says,
them and going,
"Haha."
mine, mine, and luxuriate in everyone
Mary
going,
just
damn it,
says,
we want one now.
PXD.
Wynn says, I have a basic outline and write from plot point to plot point.
Okay,
I can't go by word count for some reason.
this is from the prologue, and it's the section. And you remember I was saying that at the end of book 2, we'd been told that Lady Marguerite Blakeney had been arrested for treason and spying.
Yes.
So this refers to that.
Eve says,
Prologue.
Mary laughing face.
The two elderly gentlemen rose as the woman entered the room. She might be a French spy, but there was no need for rudeness. Such a thing would stamp them as no better than the Republicans who had seized power in France. They waited only the bare minimum of time for her to take a seat, however, before resuming their own places behind a heavy and intimidating desk, in a whisker of coats and wigs which made the piles of paper rustle. Her escort stepped back to stand beside the door, his hands folded behind his back. He gave the slight nod which had been agreed on as a signal between them. She had attempted to pass a message to someone on their journey here. The little clerk in the corner of the room, apparently beneath the notice of everyone present, scribbled down ceaseless notes on every word and action in the room. Lady Blakeney. It was the first man who spoke, the older of the two. I trust we find you well today. Mr. Addington, Mr. Ford. She inclined her head politely. Her redingoted hat had the unmistakable touch of a top-of-the-line modiste, and her exquisite diamond earrings demonstrated her husband's wealth. A few red gold curls fell becomingly to frame her face. I am indeed well, and I thank you for your courtesy in allowing me to remain at my husband's town residence until I am found innocent of these appalling charges. That, madam, depends largely upon yourself. It was Ford's turn to speak. The higher of the two stacks of paper on the desk rested before him, and he tapped it meaningfully. Permit me to say that if we chose to interpret matters more rigidly, then we would have every right and reason to lodge you in Newgate. Yes, you may well shudder. His mouth pursed in annoyance as he took in that she had not, in fact, shuddered. She looked placid and pretty enough to have been painted by the artist Reynolds, though he, of course, had been a proper patriot and would never have agreed to paint a woman who had once been associated with the Revolution, however rich her husband might be. It was truly a pity that instructions had come down from above at the Home Office to handle this matter with a gentle touch. A few days in Newgate would crack that composure of hers. He was certain of it. I'm still uncertain on what evidence I've been charged, the woman brazened it out. While I am most grateful to your good selves for the compassion and understanding with which I've been treated, nobody will tell me anything certain except for the constant cries of spying and treason. What exactly am I supposed to have done? You are accused of selling secrets to the enemies of His Majesty the King, Addington intoned, with all the weight he would give a pronouncement from the bench in court. By stealth you have persuaded men, who should know better, to speak freely in front of you, and then passed on the information to the spies of France. Lady Blakeney paled in shock, her gloved fingers going to her mouth and pressing against her rouged lips. But why would I do such a thing? The National Convention in France are hardly my friends. I married an Englishman. I'm loyal to England. Yes. Ford and Addington exchanged meaningful glances. Indeed, Ford continued, we find the matter of your marriage most interesting. You were acclaimed as one of the wittiest women in France, with many friends who were prominent in the early days of the Revolution, and yet you married Sir Percy Blakeney, a man best known for his sense of fashion and scarcely anything else, but equally a man close to the Prince of Wales. And an extremely wealthy man, Addington added. Lady Blakeney's eyes flashed as she straightened in her chair. I married my husband because I love him, gentlemen. Indeed, Addington said, and his tone dripped with disbelief. She sniffed, in a manner that would have done credit to the haughtiest English dowager, and folded her hands in front of him. Perhaps you gentlemen have spent too long as magistrates of Bow Street, but I can only tell you... Was that hesitation a crack in her facade? Madam, if you do not tell us everything, there may be no hope for you, Ford prompted. She met his gaze, and her own eyes widened. They were a lovely blue, brighter than the common grey so often described as that colour. Mr. Ford, she said softly, her pretty French accent somehow making her words all the more appealing. Many men courted me, yes, but when Percy offered me his heart, that was the truest treasure I could ever be given. I had no interest in his money. I gave up my career and my country to be with him. I left behind everything I had ever known, to be with the man I loved. A tear began to form at the corner of her eye. And now I sit here, accused of treason, with my husband away in Antwerp. Dear heavens, I know he would speak for me, he would defend me, if only he were here. Many times I've wished he needn't go away on business so often, but I've kept silent, because it's the duty of a wife to accept her husband's obligations. But now... She flicked a dainty cambric handkerchief from her sleeve, and pressed it against her eyes. Oh, if only my Percy could be at my side now to contest these foul accusations. Yet sadly he is not here, Addington said, and in the meantime, in the absence of your husband, madam, you must answer for your own crimes. I have committed no crimes, she protested again. Gentlemen, is this England's justice? Where is the evidence against me? Who accuses me? This is the sort of thing I would expect from the courts of France. Addington's jowls twitched as he bit back a growl. You are being granted unusual leniency in staying at your husband's home, madam. Don't attempt to trick us into disclosing more information than is your due. These demands are futile. I have contacted Percy's man of law, Lady Blakeney said. I am sure he'll be able to press these demands on my behalf. Ford and Addington barely troubled to exchange glances. This had already been planned for. We stand ready to receive his questions, Ford said. As a man of law, he may be able to give you a more complete understanding of your position, madam. You are, after all, a foreigner to this country, as well as being of the gentler sex. Even if France may have acclaimed you as a wit, it is unlikely you realize how precarious your position is here. Were you to stand before a judge tomorrow, I have not the slightest doubt that you would be found guilty. Again the tears stood in her eyes. Ford was forced to remind himself that she had been an actress in Paris, and this show of weakness might be no more than a feigned display. But I thought, is there no justice in England, gentlemen? I thought now I'd left France, I'd be safe from malignant, baseless accusations. You're both magistrates at Bow Street. Surely you can look at me and perceive that I'm innocent of these charges. Ah, would that it was so simple, Anderson said, briefly lapsing into jocularity. If it were, our days would be far shorter and less strenuous. At least tell me who's accused me, she asked, suddenly pathetic. She seemed to shrink in her chair, a rose cut down and wilting. Who has been so cruel to say these things about me? Immaterial, Addison declared. The judge will be advised of it when your case comes to trial, though, of course... Lady Blakeney looked up again. Oh? If you could be of any assistance to us... He let the words trail off invitingly, waiting for a moment before he continued. We are aware that you move in the so-called Enlightenment circles, and that some of your acquaintances have spoken rashly in the past about the current government, and indeed about the king himself. If you wish to prove you are not some sort of French spy, then surely your course of action is obvious. At this she dissolved into full-blown tears, having recourse to her handkerchief and even her smelling salts. The odd phrase filtered through her sobbing, such as, "How could you?" and "My poor friends who already had to flee from France," and "What sort of woman do you think I am?" We already know that, Ford thought resentfully. You're a slut of an actress who's married into luxury by way of the most stupid man in England, and we have every reason to suspect you're the most effective French spy in this country. But if she was an actress, then he was a man of law, and he could manage his face as well as she did hers. He rang for tea, and watched as she calmed herself. It seems we're not going to progress any further today, Addison eventually said, after several more sallies on their part and 2 more outbursts of tears on hers. "We will have you return to your husband's house. Pray remember that you are not to leave it under any circumstances." "I only hope my Percy will return soon," she declared. "He will lay all these false doubts of yours to rest." "I hope so indeed, myself, madam," Addison agreed. They both stood as she left the room before resuming their seats again. "A tough character," Ford said gloomily. "Well, I'm not saying she wouldn't crack if we put her in Newgate, mind, but it might take a while." Indeed. Addison poured himself more tea, even though the pot had grown cold. The stage is a hardening influence, and she's a practised liar. No doubt she could have wept her eyes out a dozen more times before we'd finished with her. I take it there's some reason why your connections want her kept in her home, and not in Newgate for the moment?" He tactfully refrained from mentioning the Home Office. "She must still have a way of passing that information to her contacts and on to France," Ford explained. "We hope to lay our hands on some of these other spies too, or to follow her if she attempts to flee." Addison shrugged. "Well, that'd be a confession of guilt in itself. Has her husband been informed yet?" "Word's been sent to Antwerp." Ford didn't mention it had been deliberately sent as slowly as possible. The longer they had to work on Lady Blakeney without her husband, or more precisely, the influence which her husband, a fool but a well-connected fool, could bring to bear, the more they might be able to achieve. Of course, we might be agreeably surprised if he seeks a divorce, which would be most convenient. Last year they weren't on the best of terms. "Daily questioning for the moment, then, and keep her waiting a little longer each time she's brought here." Addison made a note. "And if any evidence should be found among her possessions?" "Unlikely, unless we put it there ourselves." "Let us reserve that option for later. And do thank your connections for the tip-off. I feel we may have uncovered the root of an entire league of spies here." "I feel they have done England a great service," Ford agreed. End of prologue.
K. Cooper says, asterisk dot, asterisk, star dot asterisk.
Thank you.
A star dot asterisk.
Huckleberry claps.
Sonia says, a pause.
I have to say, I love the irony that she is part of a nest of spies, but they're on the same size.
Well, it struck me when I was writing it, yes, that it is they have got exactly the wrong root of things, basically, but equally that she is an obvious candidate for a French spy, isn't it? I mean, French lady, moves in high society, married to somebody who's supposed to be a total idiot. What better coverage could you ask for?
It's clear why they suspect her, yes.
The question is, who tips them off?
Oh, quite.
And in that, when I refer to the people questioning her as being Ford and Addison, that's one of the things that you do have to research for when you're looking up the names of people, Lord Chief Justice and so on of the time. That's the sort of thing where you do have to actually research the details.
Yes. Because the courts were quite interesting in those days.
Yup, and the Bow Street runners were nothing like our modern police. They were pretty much for hire.
I always loved the Bow Street runners' characters in Georgette Hare, who are frequently mistaken for being criminals because they know so much of thieves' cant and so forth.
Yes. And also, while they sort of, if somebody says, "I'm from Bow Street," that is something of a justification for why they were following you around the place. But when you think that if you were a rich person, you could go to Bow Street and say, "I suspect so-and-so is dubious. I want to hire one of your men or several of your men to follow him and keep track of him." You can imagine how a rich person could find that very useful, can't you?
Definitely.
And yes, that is exactly why they broke her out. Though breaking her out is difficult because, as you can imagine, they were just the people behind this were just waiting for somebody to contact Lady Marguerite and break her out.
Which is difficult because they're all pretty much now in danger.
Yep, and if you've
Wynn says,
read
"I
book
can't wait to
2,
see how
then
they
you're
pull it
aware
off."
that most of the
Winky
League's
face.
identities have been blown.
Hence, disguising.
Exactly. Though, as several of the League comment, we shouldn't be having to do this in our own country, damn it.
Yes.
I think I've probably read all I can read for the moment without giving valuable plot points away.
That's fine. I was going to see if there are any more questions from the audience. Or perhaps, if you've got
No,
it to
it's
hand,
been wonderful to get these sneak previews.
we could have a short burst of Invisible Library. Would we?
I would have to go and find a copy, I'm afraid.
Use Chuckles.
I don't have one directly to hand, so I'd have to go and root through the copies to find one, I'm afraid.
All right.
Actually, wait a minute, I might have... I take it you want the first Invisible Library book.
I was thinking, yes.
I think I have one on my Kindle. Let me see if I can find it a moment.
I have all of them on my Kindle. I've sort of given up buying books because we live in a house stuffed with books.
I live in an apartment.
You have to drag her behind a room to get her in her
I live
bath
in an
dress,
apartment
too.
stuffed with books myself, and I need a bigger apartment. Don't we all?
Yeah.
Invisible
I probably
Library.
need a book room something the size
Mary
of this
Jess says,
hall.
agreed. I need a bigger apartment
Not to
for
mention all my
books.
role-playing game source books and
Mm.
all my yarn and my fabric and stuff.
Do you
Yeah.
ever play games, role-playing games like Amber?
Oh, I
can
used to love
imagine the
Amber.
efforts.
It was one of my big
Apartments
go-to
geared
things, but I haven't
specifically
played for a while. I just didn't have
bibliophiles.
time.
Nooks everywhere.
That's a shame.
What are you currently knitting?
I'm currently knitting a blanket of mitered squares.
Ashley says,
I was given a
that would
few
be
balls of wool a
beautiful.
while back from a particular type, different shades, different colours of it, and I bought a few more. And
Marion says,
I'm knitting
that kind of
8-inch
app would
mitered
be
squares now
marvelous.
and knitting them together. But I've got about halfway through. Possibly trying to do a 6x6 foot blanket was a bit overly enthusiastic. Oh, I'm also currently sewing a quilt for a friend. She's got a granddaughter coming in a few months, so I'm making a baby quilt for her.
Hopefully that's of a more reasonable size.
Ashley says,
Oh yeah, that one's only about just under a metre square. And I do...
Blankets are definitely not bus knitting.
Definitely not, no. Okay, so... Anybody want the first chapter of Invisible Library?
Yes, please.
Kay Cooper says, yes. Marion says,
Irene
lovely.
passed the mop across the stone
Wynn
floor
says
in
yes.
smooth, careful strokes, idly admiring
Mary
the gleam
just
of
says
wet
yay.
flagstones in the lantern light. Her back was complaining, but that was only normal after an evening's work cleaning, and the cleaning was certainly necessary. The pupils at Prince Mordred's private academy for boys managed to get just about as much mud and muck on the floor as any other teenagers would. Clean indoor studies in the dark arts, military history and alchemy didn't preclude messy outdoor classes in strategic combat, dueling, open field assassination and rugby. The clock in the study struck the quarter hour. That gave her 45 minutes before the midnight orisons and chants. She knew from her weeks of experience, and to be honest, her own memories of boarding school, that the boys wouldn't be getting up a minute earlier than necessary. This meant most of them would be dragging themselves out of bed at 11:45, before heading to the chapel with hastily thrown-on clothes and barely brushed hair. so that gave her 30 minutes before any of them started moving. 30 minutes to steal a book and to escape. She propped the mop in her bucket, straightened, and took a moment to rub her knuckles into the small of her back. Sometimes undercover work as a librarian involved posing as a rich socialite, and the librarian in question got to stay at expensive hotels and county houses, all while wearing appropriately high fashion and dining off haute cuisine, probably on gold-edged plates. At other times, it involved spending months building an identity as a hard-working menial, sleeping in attics, wearing a plain grey woolen dress, and eating the same food as the boys. She could only hope that her next assignment wouldn't involve endless porridge for breakfast. 2 doors down along the corridor was Irene's destination, the house trophy room. It was full of silver cups, all embossed with variations on turquoise house, as well as trophy pieces of art and presentation manuscripts. One of these manuscripts was her goal. Irene had been sent by the library to this alternate world to obtain Midnight Requiems, the first published book of the famous necromancer Balin Pestifer. It was by all accounts a fascinating, deeply informative, and highly unread piece of writing. She spent a month looking for a copy of it, as the library didn't actually require an original version of the text, just an accurate one. Unfortunately, not only had she been unable to track down a copy, but her inquiries had caught the interests of other people, necromancers, bibliophiles, and ghouls. She had had to burn that cover identity and go on the run before they caught up with her. It had been pure chance, or, as she liked to think of it, finely honed instinct, that had prompted her to notice a casual reference in some correspondence to Sire Pestifer's fond memories of his old school, and more, his donations to the school. Now, at that time that Pestifer had written the early piece, he had still been young and unrecognised. It was not beyond the bounds of possibility that in his desperation for attention, or simply out of the urge to brag, he had donated a copy of his writing to the school. And she had exhausted all her other leads. It was worth a try. Irene had taken a few weeks to establish a new identity as a young woman in her mid-20s with a poor but honest background, suitable for skivvying, and then found herself a job as a cleaning maid. The main school library hadn't held any copies of Midnight Requiems, and in desperation she resorted to checking the necromancer's original boarding house, and beyond all expectation she had been lucky. She abandoned her cleaning equipment and opened the window at the end of the hall. The leaded glass swung easily under her hand. She had taken care to oil it earlier. A cool breeze drifted in, with a hint of oncoming rain. Hopefully this bit of misdirection wouldn't be necessary, but one of the library's mottos was borrowed directly from the great military thinker Clausewitz: "No strategy ever survived contact with the enemy." Or in the vernacular, "Things will go wrong, be prepared." She quickly trotted back down the corridor to the trophy room and pushed the door open. The light from the corridor gleamed on the silver cups and glass display cabinets. Without bothering to kindle the room's central lantern, she crossed to the second cupboard on the right. She could still smell the polish she'd used on the wood 2 days ago. Opening the door, she withdrew the pile of books stacked at the back and pulled out a battered copy in purple leather. When Pestifer had sent the book to the school, had he fretted and paced the floor, hoping to get some sort of acknowledgement back from the teachers, praising his research, wishing him future success? Or had they sent him a bare form letter to say they'd received it, and then dropped his work into a pile of other self-published vanity books sent by ex-pupils and forgotten all about it? Fortunately, it was a fairly small volume. She tucked it into a hidden pocket, returned the other books to cover her tracks, and then hesitated. This was, after all, a school that taught magic, and as a librarian she had one big advantage that nobody else had: not necromancers, fae, dragons, ordinary humans, or anyone. It was called the language. Only librarians could read it. Only librarians could use it. It could affect certain aspects of reality. It was extremely useful, even if the vocabulary needed constant revision. Unfortunately, it didn't work on pure magic. If the masters at the school had set some sort of alarm spell to prevent anyone stealing the cups, and if that worked on anything that was taken out of the room, then she might be in for a nasty surprise, and it would be hideously embarrassing to be hunted down by a mob of teenagers. Irene mentally shook herself. She had planned for this. There was no point in delaying any longer, and standing around reconsidering possibilities would only result in her running short on time. She stepped across the threshold. Sudden raucous noise broke the silence. The stone arch above the doorway rippled, lips forming from the stone to howl, "Thief! Thief!" Irene didn't bother pausing to curse fate. There would be people here within seconds. With a loud scream, she threw herself down on top of her mop and bucket, deliberately sprawling in the inevitable puddle of dirty water. She also managed to crack her shin on the side of the bucket, which brought genuine tears to her eyes. A couple of senior boys got there first, scurrying round the corner in nightshirts and slippers. Far too awake to have only just risen from sleep, they'd probably been busy with some illicit hobby or other. "Where's the thief?" the dark one shouted. "There she is," the blonde one declared, pointing a finger at Irene. "Oh, don't be stupid, that's just one of the servants," the dark-haired one said, demonstrating the advantage of stealing books while dressed as a servant. "You, wench, where's the thief?" Irene pointed a shaking hand in the direction of the open window. It chose that moment to swing conveniently in the rising wind. He knocked me down." "What's this?" One of the masters had arrived on the scene. Fully dressed and trailing a drift of tobacco smoke, he cleared a path through the gathering mob of junior boys with a few snaps of his fingers. "Has one of you boys set off the alarm?" "No, sir," the blonde senior said quickly. "We just got here as he was escaping. He went out through the window. Can we pursue him?" The master's gaze shifted to Irene. "You, woman!" Irene hastily dragged herself to her feet, leaning artistically on the mop, and pushed back a straggle of loose hair. She was looking forward to being out of this place, so she could have hot showers and put her hair up in a proper bun. "Yes, sir," she snivelled. The book in her skirt pocket pressed against her leg. "What did you see?" he demanded. "Oh, sir," Irene began, letting her lower lip quiver suitably. "I was just mopping the corridor, and when I came to open the door of the trophy room here," she pointed it out needlessly, "there was a light inside, so I thought that perhaps one of the young gentlemen might be studying, and I knocked on the door to ask if I might come in to clean the room. But nobody answered, sir, so I began to open the door, and then all of a sudden someone pushes it open from inside, and it knocks me down as he runs out of the room." The audience of boys, ranging from 11 to 17 years old, hung on her every word. A couple of juniors set their chins pugnaciously, clearly imagining that they themselves would have been ready for such an event. They would have undoubtedly knocked the intruder unconscious then and there. "He was a very tall man," Irene said helpfully, "and he was all dressed in black, but something was muffled round his face so I couldn't see it properly. And he had something under one arm, all wrapped in canvas, and then the alarm went off, and I screamed for help, but he went running down the corridor and escaped through the window." She pointed at the clearly open window, an obvious, perhaps too obvious, escape route for any hypothetical thief. "And then these young gentlemen came along just after he had escaped." She nodded to the first two arrivals, who looked smug. The master nodded. He stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Jenkins, Palmwaite, take charge of the house and have everyone get back to preparing for chapel. Salter, Bryce, come and inventory the room with me. We must establish what was taken." There were muffled noises of protest from the milling crowds of boys, who clearly wanted to leap out of the window and pursue the thief. Or possibly go down to the ground floor and then pursue the thief without leaping out of a second-floor window. But nobody actually tried that. Irene cursed inwardly. A large-scale attempted pursuit of a non-existent intruder would confuse matters nicely. "You," the master said, turning to Irene, "go down to the kitchen and have some tea, woman. It must have been an unpleasant experience for you." Was that a flash of genuine concern in his eyes, or was it something more suspicious? She had done her best to leave a false trail, but the fact remained that she was the only person in the vicinity, and something had just been stolen. Most of the masters round here ignored the servants, but this one might be the unfortunate exception to the rule. "Hold yourself ready in case we need to question you further." "Of course, sir," Irene said, bobbing a little curtsy. She picked up the mop and bucket and pushed through the crowd of boys heading for the stairs, taking care not to walk suspiciously fast. She'd need 2 minutes to get to the kitchen to dump the mop and bucket, another minute to get out of the house, 5 more minutes, 3 minutes at a run to get to the school library. She'd be cutting it fine. The kitchen was already bustling when she got there, with the housemaids preparing kettles of post-chapel porridge. The housekeeper, butler and cook were playing cards, and nobody had bothered to investigate the alarms from upstairs. Something the matter, Meredith? The housekeeper inquired as Irene entered. Just the young gentlemen being their usual selves, ma'am, Irene answered. I think it's one of the other houses playing some sort of prank on them. With your permission, mum, may I step out to the washroom to get myself cleaned up? She indicated the dirty washwater stains on her grey uniform dress and her apron. Be sure not to take too long, the housekeeper said. You'll be sweeping out the dormitories while the young gentlemen are in chapel. Irene nodded humbly and left the kitchen. Still no alarm from upstairs. Good. She quietly opened the boarding house door, stepping outside. The boarding houses were in a row along the central avenue, with the main quadrangle holding the chapel, the assembly hall, and, most importantly to her purposes, the school library. Turquoise House was the second along, which meant there was just one house to pass, hopefully without drawing attention. Not run. She mustn't run yet. If anyone saw her running, it would only attract attention. Just walk nice and calmly, as if she was just simply running an errand. She managed to hold 10 yards. A window flew up behind her in Turquoise House, and the master who had spoken to her earlier leaned out. He pointed at her. Thief! Thief! Irene picked up her skirts and ran. Gravel crunched under her feet, and the first drops of rain slapped against her face. She came level with the next boarding house, Bruce House, and for a moment she considered abandoning her arranged escape plan and simply ducking in there to break her trail and slow down pursuit. But common sense pointed out that it wouldn't work for more than a few minutes. The whistling screech from behind her warned her just in time. She dived to the ground, throwing herself into a roll as the gargoyles came screaming down, its stone claws extended and clutching for her. It missed and struggled to pull out of its dive, its heavy wings soaring at the air as it laboured to gain height. Another one had swooped from the roof of Turquoise and was circling to reach a suitable angle of attack. This was one of those moments, Irene reflected bitterly, when it would be wonderful to be a necromancer or a wizard, or someone who could manipulate the magical forces of the world and blast annoying gargoyles out of the sky. She had done her best to avoid attention, keep her cover, and not endanger bratty little boys who left mud all over the floor and didn't bother to hang up their cloaks. What had it got her? A swarm of attacking gargoyles. Well, only 2 gargoyles so far, but still. And probably a mass assault by pupils and masters within a few minutes. So much for the rewards of virtue. She quickly reviewed what she knew about the gargoyles. There was one on the roof of each boarding house. They were even listed in the boarding school prospectus as a guarantee of student safety. Any kidnappers will be torn to bloody rags by our professionally maintained historical artifacts. Though after working here for several months, she thought the pupils themselves were much more lethal to potential kidnappers. On the positive side, one must always look on the positive side. The gargoyles were extremely showy, but not actually that effective over a short space of ground. On the negative side, running in a straight line to escape would make her a beautiful moving target. But getting back to the positives, the gargoyles were made of granite, as lovingly described in the prospectus, unlike anything else within earshot. This would need careful timing. Luckily, the gargoyles weren't particularly intelligent, so they would be focused on capturing her, not on wondering why she was standing conveniently still. She took a deep breath. The first gargoyle reached suitable swooping altitude. It called to the other gargoyle in a carrying screech, and then the 2 of them dropped towards her together, their wings spread in wide dark traceries against the sky. Irene screamed at the top of her voice, "Granite, be stone and lie still!" The language always worked well when it was instructing things to be what they naturally were, or to do what they naturally wanted to do. Stone wanted to be inert and solid. Her command only reinforced the natural order of things. It was therefore the perfect antidote to the unnatural magic keeping stone gargoyles in flight. The gargoyles stiffened mid-stoop, their wings freezing in place, and overshot her easily. One thumped squarely into the ground, pounding out a crater for itself, while the other came in at more of an angle. It ploughed a wide groove along the nicely smooth gravel path, before colliding with one of the stately lime trees bordering the avenue. Leaves rained down on it. There was no time for her to pause and feel smug, so she ran. Then the howling started. It was either hellhounds or teenagers, and she suspected the former. They had been in the prospectus too. The prospectus had been very helpful about the school security precautions. If she ever had to come back here again, perhaps she could sell her services as a security consultant. Under a pseudonym, of course. A sudden burst of red light set her shadow leaping down the avenue ahead of her, and proved the hellhound theory right. She had planned for hellhounds. She could plan for organized magic, even if she couldn't perform it. She just had to stay calm and cool and collected, and get to the fire hydrant ahead before they caught up with her. Among its modern conveniences, the school included running water and precautions against fire, which meant fire hydrants spaced along the main avenue. The one that lay between her and the library was 20 yards away. 10 yards. She could hear pounding paws behind her, throwing up gravel in a rattle of ferocious speed. She didn't look. 5 yards. Something panted just behind her. She threw herself at the hydrant, an unimpressive black stub of metal barely 2 feet high. But as she did, a heavy scorching weight collided with her back, slamming her to the ground and pinning her there. She wrenched her head around enough to see the huge dog-like creature crouching on top of her. It wasn't quite burning her, not yet, but its body was as hot as a banked stove, and she knew that if it wanted to, it would get much, much hotter. Its eyes were vicious coals in its flaming head, and when it opened its mouth, bearing ragged teeth, a line of searing drool dripped across the back of her neck. "Go on, try it," it seemed to be saying. "Just try something. Give me an excuse." "Hydrant, burst!" Irene screamed. The hellhound opened its jaws wider in lazy warning. The hydrant exploded at approximately knee level. Fragments of twisted iron went spraying out in all directions with a first intense burst of water. Irene was torn between thinking, "Thank goodness I'm on the ground," and "That's what comes of sloppy vocabulary and word choice." A piece of metal sheared through the air a few inches above her nose and slapped into the hellhound almost casually, sending it cartwheeling backwards with a howl of pain. It took Irene a moment to pull her wits together and scramble to her feet. The water should slow the hellhounds and douse their fires for a while, but she didn't have any other backup plans, and she still had to get to the school library. Her dress wet and her shoes soaked through, she broke into a stagger, then a run. The library doors were made of heavy studded wood, and when she yanked them open, warm lantern light spilled over from her, making you a target from anyone looking in your direction, a sense of self-preservation pointed out. She stumbled into the vestibule and swung the heavy door closed, but there was only one large lock on the door and no key. But then again, she didn't need one. She leaned over and murmured in the language, "Lock on the library door, lock yourself shut." The sound of tumblers moving into the locked position was very satisfying, especially when the next noise, a couple of seconds later, was the heavy thud of hellhound hitting the door on the other side. "What's going on in there?" an annoyed voice called from deeper inside the library. Irene had scouted the place out earlier with a duster and wax polish as an alibi. Directly ahead were the non-fiction stacks, shelves full of everything from astrology to Zoroastrianism. And to the right there was a small office where books were stored for mending. Most importantly, the office had a door she could use to get out of here, and that was what she needed. There was another thump from behind her. The main door shivered slightly under attack, but stood firm. She didn't bother replying to the voice she'd heard. Instead, she brushed the gravel from her clothing, forcing herself to calmness. The atmosphere of the place soothed her automatically. The rich lantern lights, the sheer scent of paper and leather, and the fact that everywhere she looked there were books, books, beautiful books. Another thump from the outer door, and the sound of raised angry voices. All right, perhaps she shouldn't relax too much. She stood in front of the closed office door, taking a deep breath. "Open to the library," she said, giving the word library its full value in the language, and felt the tattoo across her back shift and writhe as the link was established. There was the usual flurrying moment of awareness and pressure, as though something huge and unimaginable was riffling through the pages of her mind. It always lasted that little bit too long to bear, and then the door shuddered under her hand and opened. A sudden burst of noise indicated that her pursuers had managed to enter. She spared a moment to regret she hadn't had time to grab any other books, and quickly stepped through. As the latch clicked shut behind her, it re-established itself as part of the world she had left behind. However many times they might open it now, it would only ever reveal the office to which it originally belonged. They would never be able to follow her here. She was in a library, not just any library, but the library. And that's where I'm pausing on that.
opening. I think it's so brilliant with
Thank
the
you.
details of the hellhound and the hydrant, and yes, and the attitude towards the boys. It's and the vision of the boys. It's just great.
Thank you very much.
Addictive.
Thanks.
It can't be. Oh, it has been streamed. So, Penny, you'll be able to hear it. Muse has been recording it. Yes. I like that, what Mary has just said.
Yes.
I love that chapter too. I'm charging my Kindle.
Thank you very
Gwen
much, Mary
says,
Jest.
Marion, the book is so good.
Pepti says, where can we hear the recording?
Muse, can you give us your stream so that people know where they can go and listen to this?
Penny says, I've read
There
them
you
both
go.
and can't wait
Muse's
till the final.
stream.
Combine Two Loves Vampires and Scarlet Pimpernel. Muse says youtube.com link. Pepti says, thank you.
The first chapter of Scarlet is just so chilling.
Donnie says, behind me are books
Well, I was
from
trying to
Genevieve, and
both.
if you click them, you get to
I was
the
trying to make
website
something
where you can
interesting
buy
out of
them.
the sheer normal banality of it, if you like. And the fact that
Yes.
everyone's just so used to it.
Mm. That's what's chilling.
Excellent, it worked.
Gwen says yes. Please visit our gorgeous book table
Right,
so you can buy and
now
pre-order.
we can all dance at the back of the library. Because we're now going to have, if you turn on your music streams, we have Davosaurus is going to be playing for us, and we can all dance. But I think that I'm going to
Penny
slip
says,
away.
Any chance
So
of
is Genevieve and Gwen, and we're going to get changed into appropriate. Well, actually, Gwen's already changed into appropriate clothing. But just to remind people, if you've enjoyed this talk and the earlier interview, there are Relay for Life kiosks at the back. And please donate, because we're all doing this for Relay for Life.
I would.
Gwen, Genevieve,
incidentally,
thank you so much.
it was my pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm honoured to be asked. And also, I would love it if someone picked this up for a series or a movie, but unfortunately, it's not my decision to make or to cause. I can only hope.
Yes, I think it would be great. Right, I'll be 2 seconds. Well, probably 5 seconds. Turn on your music stream and you can start to dance.